As we saw last time, central to our faith, central to what we believe about Jesus, is that he really died and he really rose again. Maybe the third theory would be that the disciples were deceived, that there was some form of hallucination. The disciples, after all, were very distraught and their imagination might run wild. Psychologists have confirmed that hallucinations are very much an individual experience. You don't get mass group hallucinations. And the Bible records that Jesus appeared on multiple occasions, and on one occasion to even 500 people at the same time. And when you look at the nature of the appearances, they were visual, they were auditory, they were tactile, there were meals that were had. This was not some hallucination that just was a fleeting thing for a couple of seconds. This was actually an experience that people had. And when we read through the New Testament, we see that this is a transformational experience that people write about. I think we can dismiss the idea that it was some form of hallucination. This leaves us with only one other possibility, that maybe the account is actually a legend. It's a legendary story. The nature of legends are that they don't develop while there are multiple eyewitnesses able to sort of tell the truth and to be able to refute what's being said. And what happened after Jesus' death? The news spread so fast, so quickly, and for a church to have creeds that were being quoted within 2 to 3 years of Jesus' death, these things sort of counter the idea that it's a legend. Legends are formed by what's called oral tradition of people telling stories. They're not supported by contemporary documents written within 30 years of the events. And again, like we saw with the idea of the theory of conspiracy, the transformational effect on the disciples, would they really have been martyred for a lie? I think it's fair to say that we can dismiss the substitution theory, we can dismiss the swoon theory, we can dismiss the conspiracy theory, we can dismiss the theory that the disciples were deceived, and we can dismiss the theory that it was a legend. If we remove all the possibilities of what might have happened, however crazy it might seem, as C.S. Lewis said, what we're left with must be the truth. So if we dismiss all of these other theories, we have to come to the conclusion that Jesus really rose from the dead. It really happened. And if you want to unpack this a little bit further, just think about it. If it was a conspiracy theory, then they wouldn't have had women as the first witnesses because they didn't have any standing at the time. They would have had men as the witnesses. There were multiple eyewitnesses. And if you look in Acts chapter 10, you see Peter saying that we ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. Peter's actually talking about a physical experience of having spent time. There was a consistency in the accounts of and when we look at the transformed behaviour of the disciples, all of these things come together and should make us just stop and pause and be amazed that we have a God who rose from the dead. C.S. Lewis describes the resurrection as something perfectly new in the history of the universe has happened. Christ had defeated death. The door which had been locked had for the very first time been forced open. And Dr. Simon Greenleaf is a Harvard professor who wrote sort of extensively on the legal system that much of America's approach to the law is based on even to today. He used what he had written to examine the evidence for the resurrection, and he documents his case for Jesus' resurrection in his book, The Testimony of the Evangelists. So what was the evidence? Greenleaf observed several dramatic changes that took place shortly after Jesus died, the most baffling being the behaviour of the disciples to persist with their conviction. He says it would have been impossible for the disciples to persist with their conviction that Jesus had risen if they hadn't actually seen the risen Christ. Applying his own rules of evidence to the facts, he accepted the resurrection as the best explanation for the events that took place immediately after Jesus' crucifixion. Many other legal experts, including the former Chief Justice of England, Lord Darling, agree with Greenleaf's verdict on the case for Jesus' resurrection. He writes, there exists such overwhelming evidence, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent jury in the world would fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true. As we think about Jesus and we look to know him better, my prayer is that as you realize Jesus really died and really rose again, you will encounter him in a whole new way that transforms your relationship with him.